When the Office of National Statistics casually announces that immigration during the Boris Johnson years was even more catastrophically out of control than anyone realized, with net migration hitting a staggering 944,000 in a single year, instead of the already horrific 906,000 they originally reported. And when they then revealed that 344,000 more British nationals emigrated than previously thought over a 4-year period. Because apparently the data collection method was so inadequate, they were just guessing based on tiny samples stretched beyond their original purpose. You might start wondering whether any government statistics are remotely accurate, or whether the entire apparatus of British migration policy has been operating on fantasy numbers, whilst the actual reality was far worse than anyone dared admit. And whilst these devastating figures expose a Conservative government's complete failure to control migration despite years of promises, they create an impossible political situation for Keir Starmer, whose party spent years claiming they could manage migration better than the Tories, only to discover that the true scale of the crisis they inherited makes their own policies look utterly inadequate, and whose promise to reduce numbers looks increasingly absurd. When faced with the revelation that nearly 1 million people were arriving net in a single year, whilst 250,000 British nationals were fleeing the country, they presumably no longer recognized. Quick favor if you are absolutely staggered by the revelation that migration figures were so catastrophically wrong that hundreds of thousands of people were apparently just statistical rounding errors. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Over 92% of you watching have not subscribed yet. It is free, takes 2 seconds, and helps us keep exposing the gap between what governments claim and what is actually happening. Cheers if you did. Now let us dissect the statistical bombshell. So record levels of immigration during the Boris Johnson years were higher than first feared. New figures have revealed higher than first feared. Think about that phrase. The original numbers were already terrifying. To anyone concerned about immigration, they were already record-breaking. They were already indefensible, given Conservative promises to control borders and reduce numbers. And now we learn they were underestimates. The reality was worse. How much worse? Let us find out. The Office for National Statistics said, net migration reached 944,000 in the year ending March 2023, compared with the previous estimate of 906,000. For the year ending June 2023, 944,000, nearly 1 million people net. That means, after subtracting everyone who left in a single year, and this is revision upward from already staggering 906,000, the original figure was a scandal. The revised figure is a catastrophe, and it happened on Conservative watch. Under Boris Johnson's leadership, whilst government repeatedly promised to control immigration and reduce numbers post-Brexit, this was followed by sharp fall and initially recorded with net migration. In the year ending December 2024, now estimated to be 345,000, lower than original estimate of 431,000, that was published by the ONS in May of this year. Shot before, so there is good news. Numbers have come down significantly. 45,000 is much lower than 944,000. But context matters. 345,000 is still enormous by historical standards. Pre-Brexit numbers above 100,000 were considered crisis. 345,000 is more than triple that. So yes, it has fallen from peak, but it remains at levels that would have been politically unthinkable. A decade ago, the main drive of the change in the net migration figures is an improvement to the way the ONS calculates the migration of British nationals. Improvement to the way they calculate translation. The previous method was rubbish. They were getting it wrong systematically 4 years. And this is not trivial error. This is not rounding differences. This is hundreds of thousands of people being missed or miscounted, which raises obvious question. If ONS was this wrong about British nationals emigrating, what else are they wrong about? How confident can we be in any migration statistics? If the methodology was this fundamentally flawed, over a 4-year period from 2021 to 2024, 344,000 more British nationals emigrated than previously thought. 344,000, more than 250,000 people just missed. Not counted properly. Emigrated means they left Britain permanently and nobody noticed. Because data collection was so inadequate that over 300,000 people could leave, and the official statistics would not capture it. This is not just statistical error. This is complete failure of governmental data collection. At most basic level estimates of net migration of British nationals were previously based on the International Passenger Survey, but this had a very small sample size and had been stretched beyond its original purpose, so it's no longer considered to be a reliable measure. The ONS said International Passenger Survey, Small sample size stretched beyond original purpose. This is ONS admitting their methodology was inadequate. They were using survey design for something else, with insufficient sample size, to produce national statistics that informed government policy, and they are only now admitting this was not reliable. How many years did they produce unreliable figures? How many policy decisions were made based on data they now admit was not fit for purpose? The estimates are now produced, using more robust and comprehensive data from the Department for Work and Pensions, which incorporates everyone with a national insurance number and which can be used to determine the likely migration status of UK individuals. More robust data from DWP using national insurance numbers. This is obviously better methodology. Everyone who works legally has NI number. This is comprehensive administrative data. Not tiny survey samples, but this raises question. Why were they not using this data all along? NI numbers have existed for decades. DWP data has always been available. Why was ONS relying on inadequate surveys when better data existed? This is governmental incompetence or bureaucratic territoriality, preventing sensible data sharing. The improved figures mean estimates of the immigration by British nationals being revised upwards. More people left than previously thought in 2024. Some 257,000 British nationals are now estimated to have left the UK, compared with an initial estimate of 77,000. 257,000 versus 77,000, that is not minor revision. That is more than tripling the figure in single year 2024. Initial estimate was 77,000 British nationals left. Revised estimate is 257,000. That is 180,000 people who were just missing from original statistics. How do you miss 180,000 people leaving the country in a single year? This is statistical malpractice. Now let us talk about what this means politically. For Conservatives, this is damning evidence of complete policy failure. They promised Brexit would allow control of borders. They promised to reduce immigration. They set target of tens of thousands. And instead, net migration hit nearly 1 million in single year. That is not just missing target. That is demolishing it, going in completely opposite direction. And it happened whilst they were in government, whilst they controlled policy, whilst they had all the tools Brexit supposedly provided. This is comprehensive betrayal of voters who supported Brexit, partly to control immigration for labor. This creates impossible situation. They criticized Conservative immigration record. They said they could manage it better. They promised competent governance. But these revised figures show the problem they inherited is even worse than anyone thought. How did they reduce from 345,000, which is where we are now, to anything resembling the tens of thousands at public ones? They cannot not without dramatic policy changes. That will be politically controversial and economically disruptive. So they are stuck inheriting catastrophic failure whilst having promised to fix it. And the title Starmer, forced to resign as British migration numbers reach record high, captures a political impossibility. These are not Starmer's numbers. These are Conservative numbers. But politically, migration is now his problem. If numbers stay high, he owns it. If numbers fall but remain elevated, he gets criticism. And these revised figures showing true scale of crisis make his task even harder, because they reveal how massive the challenge actually is. The British nationals emigrating in huge numbers is particularly concerning because it suggests brain drain or people fleeing country. They no longer recognize 257,000 in single year. Who are these people? Young professionals seeking opportunities abroad, wealthy individuals relocating for tax reasons, retirees moving to sunnier climates. We do not know because data is aggregate, but there is 250,000 British citizens per year deciding their future lives elsewhere. That is not a healthy sign for country. And the 4-year revision showing 344,000 more emigrated than thought means over 4 years an additional 344,000 British nationals left. Beyond official statistics, combined with a massive immigration, this means Britain is experiencing population replacement at historically unprecedented pace. British nationals leaving, foreign nationals arriving. And the official statistics was so inadequate, they missed hundreds of thousands of people involved in this transformation. The admission that international passenger survey was stretched beyond its original purpose is particularly damning because it suggests ONS' new methodology was inadequate, but continued using it anyway. Stretch beyond original purpose means you are using tool for something it was not designed for, that produces unreliable results. ONS knew this, they kept using it. They produced statistics that informed policy, and those statistics were wrong by hundreds of thousands. This is institutional failure. And using DWP data going forward is improvement. But it does not fix the fact that historical data is now known to be unreliable. We thought we knew migration patterns over the last decade. Now we know official figures were substantially wrong. How do we trust any historical analysis when baseline data was as inaccurate? How do we assess where the policies worked or failed? When the numbers they were based on were wrong, the political fallout will be significant. Conservatives will face renewed criticism for presiding over record migration, whilst promising to reduce it. Labour will face pressure to deliver dramatic reduction from levels now known to be even higher than thought, and Reform UK will use these figures to argue entire political establishment has failed on immigration, and only radical change can fix it.